When something like this happens, for the first time in my life, it hit home where what I was actually doing and the people I was involved in and the lifestyle I was leading.
I'm a great believer in fate and aura. I think what's meant to be is what's meant to be. I think about Tony, and I think if I was meant to die that night in the Range Rover, I would have done. We're all born with a card, and there's a date on which we're going to die. There's not much we can do about it. I don't know how my card is marked, but I know what colour it is, claret and blue. You can see West Ham's ground from the maternity hospital from where I was born. I was born on the 1st of March 1959. I'm a Pisces, and I was a bit of a dreamer. My childhood was full of music and parties. I grew up with the Beatles. I've got every single album. My mum preferred Elvis, and so did all my aunts. I ended up a bit of an Elvis impersonator as a kid. Then there was the football, of course. I remember watching the World Cup in 1966 on a black and white telly. Vivid memories. We weren't badly off. The family went to holiday to Spain when I was 8 or 9, while other families were still going to holiday camps in the UK. But I was always aware what I had in material things, I lacked in simple love. My mum, Andrea, was totally focused on her career. She ended up working on the administrative side of Barclays Bank, and went as high as she could in her department. She earned more money than my dad. I felt quite sorry for him sometimes. Norman, my dad, had been in the Merchant Navy, and he came out with quite a lot of money. That was important to him. He was a working class boy from Dagenham, and he'd lost his mother when he was 14. His dad, my grandfather, left the kids after she died, and always hated him for that. These days the kids would have been taken into care, but Dad became a purser on the QEI and went around the world twice. He looked after stars like Richard Burton, Elizabeth Taylor and Robert Mitchum. He was prepared to work for a nice life. Back home during the 60s, he and my mum opened up cafes. My dad gave it the name. One is still going in Ilford, the Mocker. The customers included boxer Billy Walker. He and his brother and friends would come after finishing their work as doormen at the Ilford Palais. They'd hang out and listen to the jukebox. When I was a baby, I would be sat up on Billy's lap. He'd hold me up and say, "I'm going to teach him to look after himself." Then it all went pear-shaped for my dad's business, and he blew all the money. He laboured by day and studied at night until he was qualified to be an electrician. We ended up moving from Ilford to a bungalow on Canvey Island, and finally settled in Forest Gate when I was 2 or 3 years old. Dad was a Sparks until I was about 9 or 10, when he decided to emigrate to Australia. We had all the vaccinations, he sold all the furniture, booked places on a boat, and the house sale was agreed. The purchasers, however, came back and tried to knock the price down by a massive amount. Dad refused and got another job in order to pay for more furniture for the house to tide us over. In the end, the furthest we moved was East Ham, when I was about 13. With both my parents doing overtime, we kids were quite often left with babysitters, or sometimes with the people next door. I'd watch the other kids sitting on their parents' laps, cuddling and kissing. I didn't even see my parents when they came back home. They'd cook dinner, and I'd be going to bed. Without their affection, I had to rely on myself, and I was starting to develop a bit of inner steel. I just got on with life, but I never enjoyed having to stay away from home. Sometimes I'd say that Mum wanted us home early, and I'd get into our place by sliding down the old coal chute that went into the cellar of the old Victorian house and let my sister Tracy in through the front door. They looked after us. By the time I was 7, I could stew, cook and iron. Tracy was 18 months younger than me, my only sibling. Most of the families in the area were bigger, and I always wanted an older brother. Someone to rescue me when I was in trouble. I thought about how together we'd go down the road and we'd have a fight and stand together as a family. See, that's the daydreamer, Pisces. Instead, my friends became my brothers. I never had. My mum herself had 2 brothers, Rodney and Tony. Tony was an army man, and I idolised him. He was my first icon. His regiment was based in the Tower of London. When we drove past when I was a kid, I used to say, "My uncle lives in the castle." It was a fairy tale, and I was so proud of him. I remember seeing him for the first time in the tower, with a tattoo on his arm of an eagle going through a cloud. It was a big influence in my life, and I ended up later on getting a tattoo identical to his. Mum's family was a big clan from Southern Ireland. My great-grandmother came over with 13 of them. 5 brothers, 7 sisters, including my nan, Florence. Flo met my granddad, George Avery's over here. He was of Belgian descent. Our ancestors had a Roman Egyptian side, and all of them had dark hair and green eyes. They were a good-looking family. Meanwhile, my paternity grandfather was Jewish mixed religion, which caused friction with the Catholic branch of the family. I think Mum had a bit of anger in her. She rebelled against the faith and she was very impatient. She couldn't handle me at all. Tempers ran in the family. Must be all that Irish and gypsy blood. My great-grandma, Nana Kate, was in her 70s and she walked around with a cane that she'd swing at you. If you misbehaved in front of any of them, you'd get a clip around the ear hole. My dad was more the calming influence. He's lovely, my dad. He's my best friend now. Possibly the greatest man I've ever met. I've realised that as I've got older. Florence always wanted my sister and I to be brought up Catholic, but went to so many weddings and funerals we practically were. I was very close to my Nana Flo and to my other grandparents and great-grandparents. I was the first great-grandchild, I was the first grandchild, and I was the first son, which in a large extended family is a big deal, and I was spoilt rotten by everyone. I liked staying in Flo's house, even though going there meant I would be sleeping in a bed under the shadow of her crosses and the gloomy pictures of the Virgin Mary. I love my granddad as well, at least the one on my mum's side. I don't even know the name of my dad's father, the man who walked out on him. He saw me just once when I was a baby, then he went out of my life until I was 14 when he was dying of cancer and came over to pay a last visit to us. I barely spoke to him. He was a park keeper in Bermondsey. When I was 8 or 9, I got up early every Saturday to visit him in his park keeper's hut. Inside, we listened to the radio while I ate sandwiches. My granddad was nearly blind, but he used to do all the flower beds himself and they were beautiful. He was brilliant. Those were some of the happiest times of my childhood. I forced myself to get up. It hurt, but one thing I'd had enough of was being pushed around by all the boys at school. They were jeering, "Ain't you had enough?" I was 11 years old and starting to fight back, but I would never stop. I could have easily have shrunk into myself, but that day I stood up and said, "That's enough." The kid that started it said, "Right, after school," and we ended up going around the corner to sort it out. Before long, I was fighting boys 2 or 3 years older than me, and I became very good at it. But to begin with, I got into battles because I was teased about the way I looked. I was very cautious of my image. My eyesight wasn't great and I had to wear glasses from the age of 7. There were no designer glasses for kids in those days. It was either the round NHS specs or the ones I went for, Buddy Holly style. Kids are kids and you tended to get a bit of abuse at school, even at 7. It got much worse when I passed my 11 plus and went to Stafford Grammar, even though it was the best school in Newham and highly regarded throughout the East End. But then, I was aware of fashion. It was the era of the skinhead, the end of the 60s, Ben Sherman, mock hair, chinos, Doc Martens. But at school we ran the risk of getting sent home if we didn't wear flannel trousers and the regulation shirt and tie. But that was bad enough even without the glasses, particularly as I started meeting girls, they'd started noticing me. So I sat at the front of the class where I could see the blackboard without my specs. There were more geeky kids at this school than at any other school because it was grammar and that brought out the bullies. I didn't like bullies then, and I still don't like them today. I began to be one of their targets, as did the school in general. It attracted trouble because it was the best in the area, with more intelligent people who had different ways of doing things. Needless to say, the other kids in the area didn't like that. By the time I was 13 and 14, I'd been fighting back for a while, and starting to find myself and build a reputation. I looked more like I was 18 and hung around with older boys, which meant I could get into nightclubs where I would tell the girls I had a job. I left my childhood behind before it had finished. I could feel a new phase of my life beginning. I had learned to stick up for myself, and I stuck up for my friends as well. I had a couple of mates who I felt sorry for because they were bullied at school. They hero worshipped me, but it got a bit weird when I went out to buy some new items of clothing, and the next day they'd had the same thing, same make and same colour. When I got to 15, I was supposed to take 14 mock O-levels, but I was far more into girls, bunking off school, often to see West Ham, clubbing, and getting myself into trouble. It was the start of my rebellious phase, and I became Jack the Lad. The only exams I did well in were cookery, art, history, and the English language. I couldn't really give a fuck about the rest of them. They should have given out O-levels in fighting because I had established myself as one of the top boys. I found my first real love that year with Teresa. We ended up having a kid when I was just still 16. In those days it was quite naughty. She had to take a break from school to have the baby. I really wanted to keep him, but her parents pressured her relentlessly to give him up for adoption. They made her say her education was more important and she couldn't give up her life. In the end I went along with it, telling myself if nothing else at least we could stay together. I signed away my only son when I was hardly an adult myself. We had to fill out all the paperwork before she could even have the baby. It was awful. Teresa was a week in hospital with him and I got to see him every day. Even the nurses were saying, "Oh, what a beautiful baby." I kept saying, "Keep him, Teresa, keep him." My parents were behind me and told us we could come and live with them, and they'd help us to bring him up. My mother said that she would give up her work that meant so much to her in order to bring him up while I was at work. The authorities came along and took him away. It was one of the saddest moments of my life. It was a long time ago, a different mentality then. I wouldn't see him for another 25 years. Teresa couldn't stop crying. I thought it was the kid, but eventually she told me the bad news. My parents don't want me to see you anymore, she sobbed. I was stunned. We'd been through so much. For the last 3 months of the pregnancy, she'd been hidden at my house, and she sneaked back home late at night. Also, her parents' neighbours wouldn't see. I thought of everything that we'd been through, and I went mad. I ended up having a fucking big row with Dad, and offered him out. I thought he was really cold and callous. Why can't your daughter see me? I demanded. 'Cause you'll make her pregnant again. Well, surely after everything we've been through, she's given the baby up because of you. Wouldn't it be better she stays with the same person all of her life? At least if there's one person you know, she'll learn by her mistakes. But he wouldn't have it. They stopped to see me. It was all fucked up. We became secret lovers. I continued to see her for a long time. Then I met Karen. We fell in love. I wanted to get engaged. Even though I always loved Teresa and wanted us to get back together again, it was all the creeping round. We'd been doing it for 18 months. I told Teresa it was over. Oh no, she said, but I was going to tell my mum and dad that I was seeing you. But it was all too late by then. I was 17. It was a couple of years down the line and time had passed. Things with Karen were good. She was a really nice girl and I thought I'm not going to fuck this relationship up. I didn't want a bit on the side. I got engaged to Karen and I got a job down the docks. You had to have a relative or know someone to work at the Royal Albert Dock. Luckily, Dad had a mate in the ship repairers, Green and Cellyware Limited. The offices were where London City Airport is now. I had an apprenticeship lined up. My dad said I was going to be a welder, electrician or a panel beater. In the end, I went for an engineer. That's a good choice, said Dad. Get your sitting gills and get a trade because you'll always be able to fall back on that. Whatever else you want to do in life, that was easy. The only thing I wanted to do was be a footballer. I wasn't that bad as a kid. I played with popular boys and we won our league. We got to go to West Ham and play a trial against their Colts. The kids had already made it. It was my pop idol moment. Only instead of performing in a glitzy studio in front of Simon Cowell, we played in front of the West Ham scouts on a rain-soaked muddy pitch at the Chatham Heath training ground. It didn't matter. I wanted more than anything to play for West Ham, even for a day. Put on the shirt, walk out in front of the crowd at Upton Park. Just imagine. It's a dream I've never lost. I usually played up front and they told me to take fullback and I marked a kid a year older than me. He was unbelievable. He was playing midfield, coming down the right and he fucking slaughtered me. He fucking turned me inside out. I was on my arse most of the game. I couldn't get near him. I trudged off the pitch and I knew this was my chance gone. His name is Alan Kirbishley and he's now the West Ham manager after a stellar career as a player. So I'd like to say it's Kirbishley's fault I didn't get in. In reality, I knew that if I'd been that good, I'd have made it as a professional footballer anyway. So I did my apprenticeship in the docks and what a great life. The characters in the docks were proper old school, lots of comedians. I learned a lot in those 4 years of my life. I praised my sitting gills and went to college for a year. I ended up as a maintenance engineer at Queen's Mary's Hospital. I'd left home, bought my own home, married Karen and my daughter Carly was on the way. I subsidised my earnings as an engineer with door work. I never had big ambitions, I just wanted enough. But it wasn't long before I realised that I could earn more money being a doorman than going to work 7 days a week. My life was about to change, in a big way.